Good morning. It's great to see all of you here in church this morning. I thank you so much for worshiping with us and coming to be at St. John the Divine this Sunday morning. If you happen to be new to our church, if you're visiting our church, as we do almost every Sunday, have just new people exploring the Orthodox Church, we want to welcome you to our community. And please, as you're exiting this morning, introduce yourself either to me or to make sure that you introduce yourselves to our welcoming team. They'll tell you all about the great programs that we have here at St. John the Divine. And to those of you that are tuning in and watching our services online, we love having you part of our virtual family. And if you're downloading this Sunday's sermon, and if you find it beneficial to you in your own walk of faith, do us a favor, simply share that message with your friends and family. One of the easiest things that we should always be asking ourselves is every single week is, how have I shared my church? How have I shared my faith? We try to make it as easy as we can every single Sunday with you. All you gotta do is simply click a button that says share. So simply to share these messages. And I know that many of you receive my daily messages that I send out every single day. My wife Roxanne and I do this together at 7 a.m. Eastern time in your email inbox. If you do receive those, you can definitely share those as well. And as I share with you, if you have not received them all or want to receive them, you can find out how to do so in today's worship guide. There's a link that you can simply click on to get our daily messages. So let's get started. Several weeks ago, we started a sermon series called Summer at St. John the Divine. And we have basically, the premise behind it was that we were covering desires and needs that all of you have. Questions that you wanted me as the priest to speak about on a Sunday morning. And so we've covered an array of topics. And today we're closing out this sermon series with the one that I think that I'm putting on my list for all of you. And today I want to talk to you about seeking the good. Friends, we're living in a world right now, as we see on the news every single day, where people are pointing out other people's mistakes. They're talking about how bad they are or their problems. We even see it in the nuclear family, within families. Your spouse doesn't do what you ask them to do. You want to get upset and you point at them at why they didn't do the right thing. Or to our children or to our parents. We're doing a lot of pointing about what people are not doing. To make matters worse, out in the real world, outside of the walls of your home, we see that happening. We see road rage growing every single week where people are getting angry to the point where they're killing each other. We see issues of anger at work and frustrations in the workplace continuing to grow. We're doing a lot of pointing. And one of my biggest worries and concerns for our society is that we have forgotten to seek the good, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to be merciful. I think we're living in a world where we're doing a lot of pointing at what people do wrong instead of looking at what we're not doing wrong. I received a poem the other day that I'd like to share with all of you that I love, actually, one of my favorite poems called Heaven's Surprise, and maybe some of you have heard it. This is the way it goes. It's about a man who is standing before Christ on the day of judgment. He's entering the kingdom of heaven and he says, "I was shocked and bewildered, confused when I entered heaven's doors, not by the beauty or the majesty, nor its decors. It was the people who I saw in heaven, the people that made me upset. I was aghast. There were sinners there, people that frustrate me and anger me. They are those liars. And there's even the people that I like to call just simply trash. There stood the kid from second grade that stole my lunch twice. Next to him was my neighbor, who never had anything nice to say, always complaining. Or the coworker, Al, who would always let me down. Here he was in heaven. And so I asked Christ, what is your deal? How did all these sinners get up here? It must have been a mistake. Why is everyone so quiet, so somber when they're looking at me? Please give me a cue." Jesus said, "It's because they're all in shock, because they never thought they'd be seeing you." Can I just tell you, church family, mercy is not giving people what they deserve. It's giving them what God would tell you they need. I just want to encourage all of you every day as you go out in this world to seek the good and to recognize that we have become such great judges of other people's mistakes and great lawyers of our own. In this morning's gospel lesson, taken from the Gospel of Matthew, a man asked Jesus, "How do I get into the kingdom of heaven?" I don't know about all of you, but that should be our purpose. How do we get into the kingdom of heaven? Jesus tells him that you have to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and you have to love your neighbor as yourself. This man, in a very arrogant way, simply responded, "Well, I already do that." So Jesus wanted to test him, and oftentimes when people read this message, they get caught up in the whole idea of rich and poor, how much money people have. That's the secondary notion. The primary point is that this man was saying something that he was not doing. He was not expressing that love. And so Jesus gives him some comments about how he should live. And then in the book of Ephesians, I want to open your Bibles up to page 264. It's these yellow Bibles that are in your pews, to a book that I want you all to remember speaks so much about how we are to treat people. Again, it's page 264 in your yellow Bibles. We're looking at the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verses 10 to 13. Listen to what it says. This is Christ speaking through St. Paul, writing a message about how we are to treat people. He says, "Finally, build up your strength in union with the Lord." In other words, we cannot be Christians as we understand them to be if we're not in unity with one another. Right before you said the creed, all of you said your statement of faith. What does it say? I say, let all of us, not me, but all of us, love one another, that with one mind we can confess to the Lord. You can't confess to the Lord something that you're not doing. It's telling us we need to stay in unity with one another. So build up your strength in unity with one another by means of his mighty power. Put on God's armor every day you go out. And I've shared with this many times with you that we are in a spiritual battle. If you do not think that we're in a spiritual battle, turn on the news and you see it for yourself. Put on all the armor that God gives you so that you'll be able to stand up against the tricks of the devil. Now keep in mind, this book is written after the resurrection. Christ has already destroyed death. Yet St. Paul is warning the people there, be careful that you don't give a foothold to the enemy. For we are not fighting against our brother and sister. Notice the words. Your enemy is not your spouse. It's not the person that cuts over 3 lanes of traffic tomorrow morning on your way to work. That is not the enemy or your coworker. But our fight is against the wicked spiritual forces in this world. There is a darkness in this world, friends, that is wanting to separate you from the person who's sitting next to you, from me, and from the world. It exists. And if we're going to seek the good, we have to know that we have to stand in unity with one another. So how do we do that? How do we stay in unity and seek the good? Here's 3 different ways that I want to encourage you to do so. We seek the good when we remember how merciful God was for you. If there's an area that so many of us forget about, it's just how merciful God was for you. You know, on the night on which before Christ was on the cross, he gathered all of his disciples. Now check this out. He gathers all of his disciples. They go to a dinner. And back in those days, we call this the Last Supper or the mystical supper. But back in those days, the tables were not high. They were only about 6 to 12 inches off the ground. And so people would have their feet next to someone else. And so as they were sitting at this table, the tradition was that when someone would walk into that place, someone would get up from that table and as they entered, would wash the feet of those people that were in there for dinner. That was called a foot washer. That was their primary responsibility. Every one of the disciples, even our beloved St. John, walks in there and sits down. No one is standing up to wash Jesus' feet. So what does Jesus do? He shows by example. He gets up off of that table, takes a towel, and gets on his hands and knees and begins to wash the dirty feet of those disciples. Now, they didn't wear shoes like we wear now. They wore sandals. So you can imagine, if you ever walk out into a muddy floor, how much dirt and gunk Christ was wiping. Now, this gets a little bit deeper. Those 12 people there, Christ knows everything. Every one of them would desert him, and he knew it. So here he was washing the disciples' feet, and every one of them was going to say, I don't know who he is, with the exception of John. Peter would deny him 3 times. He still washes his feet. Judas, who would betray him, give me your feet, Judas, and he washes his feet. God was sharing with all of us what it means to seek the good in everyone. And he wants us to never forget that. Remembering what Christ has done for us. Here's number 2. We need to always seek the good by remembering what God has done for us. Here's number 2, is we seek the good by remembering that you and I are going to stand before Christ one day. Now, this is one of those areas that people don't like Father Nick to speak about. And I'm not one of these doom and gloom kind of priests, but I would not be doing my job for you if I didn't tell you that one day you are going to stand before Christ. That we just said it. In the creed it says, and he will come back again to do what? To judge the living and the dead. In the divine liturgy, we just said it. A Christian end to our life that is peaceful, listen to this phrase, without suffering. And I don't know about all of you, but I don't want to suffer. I don't want to stand before my Christ suffering because of the mistakes I made in this life. The way I like to put it is this: I would rather stand before Christ having loved too much than judged too harshly. I'd rather stand before God having loved too much, sought the good in people, than to stand before God having judged too harshly. Where do you want to stand? And here's number 3. We remember that he's going to come back. We remember what he did for us. And here's number 3, is that we remember that if we want to seek the good, we have to overlook people's mistakes. I remember my first sermon that I gave to you guys almost 17 years ago. I stood at that pulpit, was so uncomfortable with speaking in public that I had to have my entire sermon written out. And I literally would take my little finger and I would just read this way. A lot has changed since that time. But you know what my sermon was to all of you? One line says this: I'm going to make you upset. I am going to disappoint you. I'm not going to get it right all the time. But make no mistake how much I love you. The same goes true for all of you. You all make other people upset and mistakes made. But your heart is not there. It's not intentionally doing that. Jesus spent time with the worst of the worst. Tax collectors like Matthew. Even the Samaritan woman who he wasn't even supposed to talk to. With harlots. He showed us what it meant to seek the good in people. And I'm asking you to do the same. To just overlook people's mistakes. Because none of us are perfect. I leave you with this. I love St. John Chrysostom. He's the author of our divine liturgy. He compiles it. And what's very interesting about St. John Chrysostom is that he didn't have an easy life. In fact, when you study his life, he grew up and became the Archbishop of Constantinople. He lived in the 4th century. He gives sermons, that's why it's called Chrysostom, which means golden mouth or golden tongue, because he was absolutely eloquent. And people think sometimes that his sermons were so powerful that people would sit for hours and hours. You notice how lucky all of you are that we only get about 20 minutes. But he would speak for hours and hours. In fact, if you ever want to study the Orthodox Church's interpretation and understanding of the Bible, read John Chrysostom. Every book of the Bible, he writes about. He's the one who created the sermon series that we try to do in our church. Because every Sunday he would do a different book in the Bible. But he suffered greatly, and people were oftentimes against him because he would speak out Listen to what he says about seeking the good. He says, even if you and I, this is him preaching now at a sermon, even if you and I stand at the summit of virtues, in other words, if we've done everything right, just like this morning's gospel, but we don't have mercy, listen to me, everyone. This is what he says. You cannot be saved. Like, you can't be saved. And I just wonder how many of us are allowing ourselves, our egos, to stop us from being saved. How many of us are allowing ourselves to not show mercy, not show compassion, but allowing us to potentially not be saved? No, I want to encourage all of you, church family, to go out today, seek the good. Seek the good by remembering what Jesus did for us. He washed our feet too. Seek the good by always remembering that I'm not perfect. And seek the good by overlooking people's mistakes. Because I'd rather stand before God having loved too much than judged too harshly. We need a lot less pointers and a lot more thumbs. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for downloading this message. I hope that in some small way this sermon can inspire you, motivate you, and guide you in your walk of faith. I'm a firm believer, friends, in what I like to call practical Christianity. Basically trying my best to give you some steps and some tips that you can follow to apply this sermon in your everyday walk of faith. And so if you have found this sermon beneficial, do me a favor. Not only do I want you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you get access to all of our sermons, but I also want you to share them with your family and your friends. Let's go out and make a difference in this world, and hopefully this sermon can be one way that we do just that. I also want you to stay in touch with us all throughout the week on our social media platforms. Friends, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook and Twitter, all under the headings of The Louhs. And this past year, Roxanne and I started sending out these daily inspirational messages. And if you would like to receive those messages, go to our website at thelouhs.com/subscribe. And all you have to do is simply put up your email address, and every day at 7 a.m., you'll receive one of our daily words of encouragement. And finally, friends, if I can ever be of assistance to you, do me a favor. You can stay in touch with me by going and emailing me at fathernicholas@thelouhs.com. That's fathernicholas@thelouhs.com. Once again, everyone, thanks so much for downloading this message. God bless you, and stay strong in your walk of faith.